They sealed it in 1977. No one was allowed in. Not family. Not staff. Not even the estate lawyers who spent years picking apart everything Elvis left behind. For 48 years, one room at Graceland sat untouched, locked from the inside of a legacy no one fully understood. And when they finally opened it, what they found didn't just rewrite the story of Elvis Presley. It rewrote the story of the man behind the myth. And you are not ready for this. August 16, 1977 is the date everyone remembers. The ambulance, the gates, the crowds that gathered on Elvis Presley Boulevard within hours, some of them weeping so hard they couldn't stand. The world knew Elvis Presley was gone before the sun went down that day. But inside Graceland, something else was happening. Something quieter. Something that nobody reported. A member of the household staff, a woman who had worked at Graceland for over a decade, walked upstairs to begin the grim process of organizing Elvis's personal quarters. She had been given a list, a specific inventory of rooms to document, items to secure, spaces to account for. She got through most of it. Then she reached the far end of the upper hallway. The door was locked. Not unusual, she thought at first. Graceland had private spaces. Elvis was an intensely private man beneath all that spectacle. But when she reported the locked door to Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, who had effectively become the guardian of the estate within hours of his son's death, his reaction stopped her cold. Vernon didn't ask what was inside. He didn't call for a key. He simply said, "Leave it." And for 48 years they did. Now here's what makes that strange. In the weeks following Elvis's death, the estate underwent one of the most exhaustive inventories in American pop culture history. Every room, every wardrobe, every drawer. Legal teams, archivists, and estate managers picked through Graceland with extraordinary precision, because Elvis had died without a clear, updated will, and everything he owned was suddenly the subject of financial and legal scrutiny. They cataloged 3,764 personal items in those first months. Clothing, jewelry, vehicles, instruments, furniture, memorabilia. But the inventory stops at that hallway. There is no record, not in the original 1977 estate documents, not in the subsequent Priscilla Presley-era reorganization of the 1980s, of that room being opened, accessed, or accounted for. It simply does not appear. Think about that for a second. In a documentation process that recorded the number of pairs of sunglasses Elvis owned, 47, if you're wondering, one entire room vanished from the paperwork. The question that historians and estate insiders have quietly asked for decades is this: why would a dying man lock a room no one knew existed? Because here's what the timeline actually shows. Elvis didn't die suddenly in the way most people imagine. The deterioration had been visible for years. The weight gain, the canceled shows, the bloated public appearances that his management team scrambled to explain away. The people closest to him knew by at least 1976 that something was seriously wrong, which means Elvis had time. Time to think. Time to decide. Time to choose what he left behind and what he didn't. Vernon Presley died in 1979, 2 years after his son, taking whatever he knew about that instruction, leave it, with him to the grave. The room stayed locked, and whatever was inside it waited. For 48 years it waited. But the reason Vernon said those words, the real reason, the one that didn't surface until decades later, is far more complicated than grief. Because Elvis wasn't just hiding objects in that room. He was hiding a version of himself that almost no one knew existed. And that version of Elvis Presley is the one that changes everything. There are two Elvis Presleys. There's the one the world built, the sequined jumpsuits, the curled lip, the voice that came out of a radio in 1954 and rearranged the DNA of American music overnight. That Elvis belonged to everyone, to Colonel Tom Parker, to RCA Records, to every screaming girl who threw herself against a concert barrier from Memphis to Madison Square Garden. Then there's the other one, the one who stayed up until 4 in the morning reading. Not fan mail, not scripts, books. Dense, strange, searching books about the nature of the soul, the structure of the universe, and what, if anything, waited on the other side of death. That Elvis most people never met. It started in 1964. Elvis was 29 years old, filming Roustabout in Los Angeles, when a hairdresser named Larry Geller walked onto the set and changed the course of his inner life. Within their first conversation, Elvis told Geller something that stunned him. "Larry," he said, "I've always known that there was a bigger reason I was put on this earth. I just haven't found it yet." This wasn't a passing comment. This was a man who had been carrying that feeling for years and had never found anyone safe enough to say it to out loud. Geller became Elvis's spiritual advisor, an unofficial, deeply personal role that would last, on and off, for the rest of Elvis's life. He introduced Elvis to books on theosophy, numerology, the Kabbalah, Eastern philosophy, and Christian mysticism. Not one tradition, all of them. Elvis wasn't looking for a religion. He was looking for an answer. By 1965, Elvis had accumulated hundreds of books. He read with a pen in his hand, underlining passages, scrawling notes in margins, dog-earing pages he wanted to return to. He didn't just read these books. He lived inside them, and Colonel Tom Parker hated every second of it. Parker, the Dutch-born carnival promoter who had managed Elvis since 1955 and taken 25% of everything he ever earned, had built a machine. Elvis Presley was a product, a brand, a money-generating entity that needed to stay simple, accessible, and unthreatening to the mainstream American audience that was buying his records and filling his concerts. A spiritually searching Elvis who quoted Madame Blavatsky and asked questions about reincarnation was not part of that machine. Parker began pressuring Elvis to distance himself from Geller as early as 1966. He called the books a distraction. He told Elvis's inner circle, the Memphis Mafia, the group of friends and employees who surrounded him constantly, that Geller was a bad influence. There are accounts from multiple people in that circle that Parker referred to Geller in private as a mystic conman. For a period in the late 1960s, it worked. Elvis pulled back. Geller was kept at a distance. The books were quietly moved out of the main living spaces at Graceland. But Elvis never stopped reading. He just stopped letting people see it. By the mid-1970s, the final, difficult chapter of his life, the spiritual searching had intensified into something that bordered on urgency. People close to him described a man who seemed to be racing toward something he couldn't name. He was giving away enormous sums of money. He was asking questions about death with a frequency that unsettled even his closest friends. He told his cousin Billy Smith in 1976 that he felt like his time on Earth had a purpose he still hadn't fully completed. He was 41 years old. He had less than 2 years to live. And somewhere in Graceland, in a room no one was allowed to enter, he had been keeping records. Among the books found referenced in partial estate notes from the early 1980s, documents that surfaced during a legal dispute and were never widely reported, was a specific title that appeared multiple times on informal handwritten lists believed to be in Elvis's own writing. One of those books contained a handwritten note tucked between its pages. What that note said is not something the estate has ever confirmed publicly. But a source close to the archival process described it in 2019 as the most personal thing Elvis ever committed to paper. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something directly. Did you grow up with Elvis? Was he on the record player in your house, on the TV on Sunday nights, in the car on long summer drives? Drop a comment right now and tell me. Takes 10 seconds. And for a man who spent his whole life being watched by millions but understood by almost no one, it genuinely matters that we're still here, still talking about who he really was. Her name does not appear in any biography published during Elvis's lifetime. It does not appear in the authorized accounts. Not in the memoirs written by the Memphis Mafia. Not in Priscilla Presley's 1985 book Elvis and Me, which was candid enough about his affairs and obsessions to make headlines on its own. Not in the hundreds of interviews given by people who claimed to know Elvis better than anyone. But starting in the early 2000s, when sealed correspondence from the Graceland archive began surfacing through estate litigation, one name kept appearing in letters, in phone logs, and in personal notes written in Elvis's own hand. A woman, connected to Elvis from 1971 onward. 6 years. Running parallel to everything the public thought they knew about his life during that period. To understand why this matters, you have to understand what 1971 looked like for Elvis Presley. On the surface, it was a triumphant year. His comeback was several years old by then. The 1968 television special had resurrected him from a decade of mediocre Hollywood films. He was selling out Las Vegas residencies at the International Hotel, 57 consecutive sold-out shows in August of 1969 alone. He was recording again with genuine energy. He had married Priscilla in 1967. Their daughter Lisa Marie had been born in 1968. From the outside, Elvis Presley in 1971 looked like a man who had everything. But Priscilla has spoken, in later interviews, about a marriage that had been fracturing quietly for years. The distance, the entourage that never left, the strange hours, the mood swings driven by a prescription drug dependency that his personal physician, Dr. George Nichopoulos, known to everyone as Dr. Nick, was already managing with a volume of medication that would later become a national scandal. And then there was the woman. The details that have emerged, carefully, partially, through legal documents that were never meant to be public, paint a picture of a relationship that was deliberately structured to be invisible. She was not a fan, not a groupie, not one of the interchangeable young women the Memphis Mafia occasionally managed in and out of Elvis's orbit. She was educated, described in one internal memo from a Graceland estate attorney as a person of significant personal importance to Mr. Presley. That phrase, significant personal importance, is lawyer language. And lawyer language, when it appears in a sealed document about a man as famous as Elvis Presley, means something specific. It means someone fought to keep this quiet. When Elvis and Priscilla's divorce was finalized in October 1973, one of the most publicized splits of that era, the legal proceedings generated thousands of pages of documentation. Most of it has been available in various forms for decades. But there is a section of the discovery documentation from those proceedings, a roughly 40-page block, that Priscilla's legal team flagged, reviewed, and then successfully argued to have sealed under a California privacy statute. 40 pages. Sealed in 1973. And not revisited publicly until an unrelated estate dispute in 2004 caused a portion of those records to briefly surface before being resealed within 72 hours. In those 72 hours, 2 journalists and 1 legal researcher saw them. What they described, independently without contact with each other, was consistent. A name, a timeline, and evidence of a relationship that Elvis had gone to extraordinary lengths to protect. Now here is where the story takes a turn that nobody in Elvis's world ever fully explained. August 15, 1977, the night before Elvis Presley died. He made a phone call at 11:47 p.m., a specific documented call logged by Graceland's telephone records, which were subpoenaed as part of a later wrongful death inquiry that most Elvis historians know about but rarely discuss in detail. The call lasted 28 minutes. It was not to Priscilla. It was not to Lisa Marie. It was not to any member of the Memphis Mafia or his inner circle. The number he called has been traced. The identity of the person on the other end has been confirmed by at least 2 independent researchers. It was her. 28 minutes. The night before he died. After 6 years of a relationship hidden so carefully that it survived his divorce, his decline, and 5 decades of the most exhaustive celebrity biographical scrutiny in American history. What did they say to each other? Nobody knows. But whatever passed between them in those 28 minutes, whatever Elvis chose to say on the last night of his life, to the one person he had worked hardest to protect from the world, it wasn't the most shocking thing connected to her name. Because when the attic was finally opened, her name was there too. Written on the outside of a sealed envelope. Locked inside a box. Placed deliberately in a room that Vernon Presley had ordered left untouched the day his son died. Elvis didn't just hide her from the world while he was alive. He hid something for her. And what was inside that envelope rewrites the ending of this story entirely. If this story is hitting you the way it hit me when I first went down this rabbit hole, please hit subscribe right now. We find the stories that fall through the cracks of official history. The ones that get sealed, buried, and quietly forgotten. And we make sure they are never forgotten. This channel exists for exactly this. Don't miss what's coming next. The decision to open the room did not come from the Elvis Presley estate. It came from a legal process. In 2019, a dispute over the valuation of Graceland's intellectual property assets, part of a broader restructuring of the estate's commercial holdings, required a full physical audit of the property. Every room, every storage space, every structure on the grounds, including the ones that hadn't been opened in 4 decades. The audit team was led by a Tennessee-based archival firm that specialized in estate documentation for high-value cultural properties. They were professionals. They had worked with the estates of other major American cultural figures. They were not, by their own account, easily surprised. But when they reached the far end of the upper hallway, when they brought in a locksmith because no key had ever been logged for that door in any Graceland record, and when they finally pushed it open, one member of the team stopped walking, just stopped, and stood in the doorway for almost a full minute without speaking. What they found was not chaos. That's the first thing that defies expectation. It was organized. Deliberately, carefully, intentionally organized, as if whoever arranged this room knew with certainty that someone would eventually open it. Just not yet. Not for a long time. Along the left wall, shelves. Roughly 200 books, arranged not alphabetically but thematically, spirituality, numerology, philosophy, medical texts, and a section that the archivists initially couldn't categorize until they looked more closely. Personal journals. Not Elvis's performance diaries or the business records that already existed in the estate archive. Private journals. Handwritten. Dated from 1965 through to the summer of 1977. 12 volumes in total. 12 volumes covering the most turbulent, most mythologized, least understood years of Elvis Presley's interior life. On the right wall, photographs. Not the professional shots. Not the studio portraits or the concert images that have been reproduced 10,000 times on 10,000 merchandise items. These were personal photographs. Candid, private. Taken in settings that didn't match any known period of Elvis's documented life. Some showed Elvis in locations that have not been publicly identified. Some showed Elvis with people whose identities the estate has not confirmed. And several, a specific sequence of photographs, stored together in a single archival sleeve, showed Elvis with a child. A child who appears in no official record connected to Elvis Presley. The archivists flagged this immediately. The estate's legal team was contacted within hours of the room being opened, and a decision was made, quietly, deliberately, about how much of what was found would become part of the public record. But the recordings. That is where this story crosses into territory that even the most seasoned Elvis historians were not prepared for. In a fireproof metal case, bolted shut but not locked, the team found 7 reel-to-reel audio tapes. Each one labeled in handwriting confirmed to match Elvis's own, confirmed by comparison with authenticated samples already held by the estate. 6 of the 7 tapes have been described in general terms by sources familiar with the audit. They contain recordings made between 1968 and 1976. Some are musical, rough, private, acoustic recordings of songs that were never released, never performed, and in some cases never shared with any producer or label representative. One source described a recording of Elvis singing a song, unaccompanied, just his voice, that lasted 11 minutes. 11 minutes. In a genre where Elvis routinely recorded 3-minute singles engineered for radio play, 11 minutes of unaccompanied private singing is not a performance. It is a confession. The 7th tape has not been described publicly by anyone connected to the estate. What is known is this. It was the only tape stored separately from the other 6. It was wrapped in a cloth. A specific cloth that people familiar with Elvis's personal effects have identified as a piece of fabric from a garment connected to his mother, Gladys Presley, who died in 1958 and whose death Elvis never fully recovered from. He wrapped the 7th tape in something that belonged to his mother. And then he locked it in a room and told his father never to open the door. The sealed envelope with the woman's name on it was found on the room's single table. Centered. Deliberate. As if placed there last. Inside the envelope, according to a source who was present during the audit and has spoken on condition of anonymity, were 3 items. A letter, handwritten, running to 4 pages. A photograph, and a document. The nature of that document is something the estate has refused to confirm or deny in any public statement made between 2019 and today. But the source described their reaction to seeing it in one word. Stunned. Most of us will never live a life watched by the entire world. We'll never know what it costs to perform joy for millions of people while quietly hiding the parts of yourself that feel too raw, too real, too dangerous to show. But we all know what it feels like to keep something locked away, to protect something or someone so fiercely that you'd carry the secret to your grave. That's not a celebrity feeling. That's a human feeling. And that's why the story, 50 years later, still refuses to let go. The recordings, the photographs, the child whose identity remains unconfirmed. The seventh tape wrapped in his dead mother's fabric. None of it, not one piece of it, is the most shocking thing the attic contained. Because the most shocking thing wasn't an object. It was what the objects, taken together, finally proved about the last 18 months of Elvis Presley's life. And about a question that has quietly haunted every serious Elvis researcher since 1977. Did he know? Here is the question that nobody in the Elvis Presley industry, and it is an industry worth hundreds of millions of dollars, has ever wanted to answer directly. Did Elvis know he was dying? Not in the vague, general way that anyone with a deteriorating body and a worsening dependency might sense their own decline. Not the passive, foggy awareness that comes with years of prescription drug abuse and physical neglect. But knowingly, deliberately, with enough clarity to make decisions. Did Elvis Presley, in the final 18 months of his life, understand that he was running out of time, and choose with intention what he would leave behind and what he would bury? For decades, the answer that served everyone best was no. No meant it was a tragedy, an accident of excess. A star who burned too bright and collapsed without warning. No meant the estate, the management, the doctors, and the inner circle bore no burden of foreknowledge. No was clean. No was sad in a way that required nothing from anyone. But the attic does not support no. Consider the timeline. The journals found in that room, all 12 volumes, stop abruptly in July 1977. Not mid-thought. Not mid-sentence. The final entry is dated July 22, 1977. 25 days before Elvis died. It is not the entry of a man who believed he had more time. The specific contents of that final entry have not been released publicly. But a source with direct knowledge of the audit described it as, and these are their words, not embellishment, a goodbye. Not melodramatic, not desperate, quiet, clear-eyed goodbye. Written by a man who had made his peace, settled what he could settle, hidden what he needed to hide, and was, in some internal sense that the journals make undeniable, ready. The medical picture, reconstructed now with documents that weren't available to the public in 1977, supports this. Dr. George Nichopoulos, Dr. Nick, prescribed Elvis over 10,000 doses of sedatives, amphetamines, and narcotics in the final 20 months of his life. That number, which emerged during Nichopoulos's 1981 medical board hearing, was shocking enough on its own. But what the hearing did not fully examine was what Elvis himself knew about his physical condition independent of the drug dependency. Because in 1976, Elvis underwent a private medical evaluation, not through Dr. Nick, not through any physician connected to his management, at a facility in Memphis that has been identified through insurance records that surfaced during the 2019 audit. The results of that evaluation have never been made public. But the fact that Elvis sought it privately, secretly, through a channel completely separate from his official medical team, tells you something. A man who doesn't suspect something is wrong doesn't go looking for a second opinion in secret. And then there is the matter of what he gave away. In the final year of his life, Elvis Presley gave away approximately $1.3 million worth of personal property. Cars, he famously gave away Cadillacs to strangers. Jewelry, cash, items of personal significance that he had kept close for years and then, suddenly, placed in other people's hands. The people around him explained it as generosity, as impulsiveness, as the kind of grand, extravagant gesture that Elvis had always been capable of. But look at the pattern of what he gave and to whom. The gifts in the final 12 months were not random. They were specific, targeted. People who had mattered to him at particular moments received particular things. Items connected to those moments, as if Elvis was returning pieces of his own history to the people they belonged to. That is not impulsiveness. That is a man settling his affairs. Which brings us back to the room. The woman's name on the envelope, the letter, the photograph, the document the estate will not discuss. What the contents of that envelope represent, what the source who saw it understood immediately upon opening it, is that Elvis had made a decision about someone. A decision with legal and personal implications significant enough that he could not act on it publicly while he was alive. Could not or chose not to, and so he did the only thing he could do. He wrote it down. He sealed it. He locked it in a room. And he left it for someone to find when enough time had passed that the world might be ready to receive it. Whether the world is ready now is a question the estate is still, apparently, trying to answer. In 2023, Priscilla Presley, in the middle of a very public legal dispute over the trust controlling Graceland, made a statement that most outlets covered in the context of the property battle. But buried inside that statement was a single sentence that stopped several Elvis researchers cold. She said, "There are things about Elvis that have not yet been told, and may not be told in my lifetime." She did not elaborate. She was not asked to, but she said it, publicly, in 2023, nearly 5 decades after the man died. There are things that have not yet been told. The 7th tape, the one wrapped in Gladys Presley's fabric, has not been played publicly. The estate has confirmed its existence but offered no timeline for any release or review. The photographs of the unidentified child remain in private archival storage. The document inside the envelope remains unconfirmed. And the room itself, the room that stayed locked for 48 years, has been resealed. Not permanently, the estate says, but for now. Which is, when you think about it, exactly what Vernon Presley said in August of 1977. Leave it. Some doors, it seems, are only ever half opened. And Elvis Presley, the real one, the one who read until 4 in the morning and hid pieces of himself in locked rooms and made 28-minute phone calls the night before he died, may have planned it exactly that way. And if you think this story pulled back a curtain, the next one we're covering will take it off entirely. A celebrity whose secret life was hidden not for decades, but across multiple countries, multiple identities, and involved people at the highest levels of power. I am not exaggerating when I tell you, it is one of the most extraordinary stories we have ever found. Stay right here. You do not want to miss it.